Most people think global economic shocks start with headlines. They don't. They start quietly, in bond markets, interest rate policies, and decisions made thousands of miles away that almost nobody is watching. Right now, one of the most important warning signals is coming from Japan. At first glance, Japan's situation looks like a local problem: rising interest rates, a stressed bond market, a government buried under decades of debt. But Japan is not just another economy. For years it has been one of the invisible pillars holding up the global financial system, and that pillar is starting to shift. Japan's economy produces roughly $4 trillion a year, but its government debt is more than double that. In everyday terms, Japan owes far more than it produces. That alone would concern any economist, but what made Japan unique wasn't just the debt. It was how long the country managed to live with it. For decades, Japan lived in a world of deflation. Prices didn't rise, growth stayed weak, wages stagnated. To fight this, Japan's central bank did something unprecedented. It pushed interest rates below zero. Negative interest rates meant the government could borrow money and pay back less than it borrowed. It sounds unreal, but that system allowed Japan to keep spending, borrowing, and delaying consequences year after year. The central bank itself became the biggest buyer of government debt. In effect, Japan financed its own system internally, suppressing interest rates and keeping borrowing costs near zero. That system worked, until it didn't. Japan is no longer facing deflation. Inflation has arrived, and inflation breaks everything that made the old system possible. Once prices start rising, negative interest rates no longer work. Borrowing can't stay artificially cheap. Interest rates have to rise, and Japan has now begun raising them to levels not seen in decades. This is not a small adjustment. This is a regime change. For years, Japan was the cheapest place in the world to borrow money. Global banks, hedge funds, and institutions quietly borrowed massive amounts in Japanese currency, then moved that money into other markets around the world. That flow of cheap money supported asset prices, fueled leverage, and helped keep global financial conditions loose. But rising interest rates change the math. Borrowing becomes more expensive, leverage becomes riskier, and that steady flow of cheap capital begins to slow or even reverse. This matters because global markets don't move on narratives, they move on liquidity. When money becomes harder to borrow, fewer buyers show up, and when fewer buyers show up, prices don't rise as easily. Japan's shift doesn't just affect Japan, it affects the entire system. There's another layer most people overlook. Japan is one of the largest foreign holders of US government debt. For years, Japanese investors accepted extremely low returns abroad because returns at home were even worse. But now that interest rates inside Japan are rising, that incentive changes. If investors can earn real returns domestically, they no longer need to send capital overseas. And when demand for government debt weakens, borrowing costs rise. Not central bank rates, government borrowing rates. That filters directly into mortgage rates, financing costs, and long-term interest rates across the economy. This is why bond markets matter more than headlines. This is why shifts in Japan don't stay in Japan. At the same time, Japan itself is undergoing a deeper transformation. Historically, the country prioritized stability over growth. Businesses were designed to protect workers, suppliers, and long-term relationships rather than maximize financial returns. That model worked during decades of slow growth and falling prices. But inflation and debt force change. Japan is now under pressure to increase efficiency, productivity, and economic output. Policies are shifting. Corporate incentives are changing. The country is being pushed toward a faster, more performance-driven economic structure. Whether that transition succeeds remains unknown. What is clear is that the old system no longer works, and when an economy that has anchored global borrowing costs for decades begins to change direction, the consequences ripple outward. This isn't about fear, it's about awareness. The biggest economic shifts rarely announce themselves loudly. They begin quietly, long before the average person notices anything is different. Japan just sent one of those signals. The global economy is entering a new phase, one where cheap money is no longer guaranteed, debt is harder to ignore, and long-standing assumptions are being tested. And understanding these shifts is exactly what we focus on here. If this helped you see the bigger picture, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to Express EconGeoFinance Insights, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because the earlier you understand the signal, the better prepared you are for what comes next.